The Baltic and Scandinavian regions have become a major focus of Russia's objectives.
3 Russian military jets entered NATO airspace without permission.
In recent weeks, Vladimir Putin believed he was testing NATO's patience and resolve one last time. Russian warplanes flew just a few meters above a German frigate sailing in international waters, literally playing with fire. Then, 3 MiG-31 fighter jets invaded Estonian airspace with unprecedented audacity for a full 12 minutes, demonstrating their disregard for the sovereignty of a small NATO country. Strategists in the Kremlin believed the West was divided, weary and indecisive, and that these reckless acts would go unanswered with a few feeble protest notes. But they were horribly mistaken. Just hours after these provocations, when the sirens sounded at the Russian Western Military District Command Center in St. Petersburg, it was already too late for everything. On the screens of the air defense radars, hundreds of ghost signals began to appear, at a level of intensity never seen before, at an anomaly level. These signals did not belong to civilian aircraft or any known military activity. An unplanned, unexpected, unidentified military buildup was gathering, precisely at Russia's most sensitive nerve center, between Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. The blood ran cold in the generals at the command center. Questions arose. Was this a drill, or preparations for an invasion starting from the Polish border? The answer was worse than either. This was the sound of a trap closing. With the emergence of the danger, 2 historic powers, Poland and Sweden, moved like a single fist, with a single command, into the heart of the Baltic Sea. The code name for the operation, quietly planned in the corridors of Washington, London and Warsaw: Gotland Sentinel. This was a ruthless checkmate move that would leave Putin with only 2 options on the table. And from this point on, both scenarios were a complete disaster for him. So, what strategic blindness on the part of the Kremlin pushed Sweden, known for its centuries-old neutrality, and iron-fisted Poland into this deadly alliance? To understand this new and deadly alliance, one must decipher how 2 opposing military doctrines came together to create a flawless killing machine that overturned all of the Russian General Staff's simulations. So, Poland's hammer and Sweden's scalpel. Let's start with the hammer, Poland. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Poland has once again shouldered a historic mission: to be the shield protecting Europe from the threat coming from the east. With their massive military investments in recent years, they have become NATO's eastern flank's toughest, heaviest, and most ruthless force. Poland's doctrine is not subtlety, but overwhelming brute force. With a planned inventory of over 1,500 tanks, they are building an armored force that will surpass not only Germany or France, but the combined armies of the entire European Union. This inventory consists of 2 deadly boxers: the American M1A2 Abrams and the South Korean-made K2 Black Panther. If the Abrams is a heavyweight champion with slow but devastating punches, the K2 is a middleweight fighter that wears down its opponent with technological superiority and agility. The mission of this steel wall is to meet, crush, and destroy Russian armored units in a potential war. So what lies behind this hammer? Behind these tanks lies a ring of fire composed of American HIMARS and South Korean-made Chunmoo rocket systems. This gives Poland the ability to destroy command centers, ammunition depots, and logistics lines in Kaliningrad or Belarus from hundreds of kilometers away, without a single enemy tank even crossing the border. The newly added F-35 stealth aircraft are the brain of this army. They infiltrate deep into enemy lines undetected by radar, identify targets, and instantly relay this information to the tanks and rocket batteries behind them. Poland's military is not a blunt force. It is an intelligent, networked, and extremely lethal weapon. On the other side is the scalpel, namely Sweden. NATO's newest member, but a cool-headed surgeon with centuries of maritime and technological tradition. Sweden's strategy is intelligence, technology, and invisibility against brute force. The brightest example of this philosophy is the Visby-class stealth corvettes, made entirely of carbon fiber and undetectable by radar. These ships can glide like ghosts through the labyrinth of thousands of islands in the Baltic Sea, delivering deadly blows to Russian warships many times their size at the most unexpected moments. However, Sweden's real power lies beneath the water. The legendary Gotland-class submarines, thanks to their air-independent propulsion, AIP systems, can operate completely silently for weeks without surfacing. They are so quiet that in past exercises, they have even managed to infiltrate the defense lines of the world's most advanced navy, the American aircraft carrier fleets. They are the invisible hunters, the silent nightmares lurking beneath the surface of the Russian Baltic fleet. Their domestically produced JAS-39 Gripen E fighter jets, equipped with Meteor missiles, among the world's best air-to-air missiles, are the flexible and deadly guardians of the Baltic skies, capable of using even a stretch of highway as a runway when necessary. So, when Poland's heavy artillery and Sweden's surgical scalpel come together, what kind of nightmare scenario does it create on the field? The Gotland Sentinel exercise painfully demonstrated that the combination of these two forces now equals 10. This was a live-fire rehearsal of a strangulation operation designed to choke off Russia's entire operational space in the Baltic. The scenario was simple and directly targeted the Kremlin's greatest fear, namely, locking down Gotland. Under this scenario, Russia could decide to attack the island of Gotland, this unsinkable aircraft carrier in the middle of the Baltic Sea with an amphibious assault fleet launched from Kaliningrad. However, the Russians' plans could turn into a nightmare from the very first moment. A Swedish Gotland-class submarine, meters below the sea, could silently detect the Russian fleet leaving port. This invaluable intelligence could be instantly transmitted via a secure data link to an F-35 command aircraft in Poland. From that moment on, the hunt would likely begin. Poland's F-16s and F-35s, under the air cover of Swedish Gripen fighters, could rain down on the Russian fleet like a steel storm. At the same time, Sweden's Visby corvettes, hidden among the islands, and Poland's coastal mobile missile batteries could turn Russian landing ships into hell before they even approached the island, firing anti-ship missiles from different directions. Russian air defense systems could be completely paralyzed against such a coordinated attack from so many different directions. The Russian landing force could be wiped out in the cold waters of the Baltic, caught between Poland's Magnet and Sweden's Scalpel, without a single soldier ever reaching shore. This new and ruthless military reality has also fundamentally changed the rules of diplomacy. The real shockwave came immediately after the exercise from the commander of the Swedish Air Force. "We are ready to shoot down Russian aircraft that violate our borders. We have no hesitation on this matter." These words signaled the collapse of a century of neutrality and passive deterrence. The message was no longer, "Please don't do this." It was, "If you do this, you will pay with your blood." This was the moment the Kremlin opened Pandora's box and unleashed a monster that would bring about its own demise. However, the true genius of this trap lies far beyond the cold waters of the Baltic. This is a highly ingeniously designed geopolitical stranglehold that weakens Russia not only regionally, but globally. Vladimir Putin's biggest mistake was to squander his army's most modern tanks, most experienced units, and most valuable logistical capacity in the mud of Ukraine over the past 3 years while invading Ukraine. The Kremlin no longer has a reserve army it could send to the Baltic front that could cope with this new, united Polish-Swedish force. This is where the strategic checkmate occurs. Operation Gotland Sentinel and this new permanent alliance have left the Kremlin's entire doctrine in the Baltic, which it views as the Russian Sea, and most importantly, the Kaliningrad exclave, so defenseless that the Russian General Staff now faces an impossible choice. Either they will abandon Kaliningrad and the Baltic fleet to their fate in the face of this superior force, or they will desperately withdraw the vital units they desperately need from the bleeding front in Ukraine and shift them north to defend the Baltic. In either case, Russia loses. If it does not defend Kaliningrad, it loses one of its most important strategic strongholds and all its prestige in the Baltic. If it withdraws troops from Ukraine, it weakens itself even further on that already difficult front and opens the door for a historic victory for the Ukrainian army. Without firing a single bullet, NATO has created a diabolical strategic dilemma by simply repositioning its forces and demonstrating its resolve, forcing Russia to weaken itself with its own resources. Faced with this situation, Putin is furious because he is no longer the one setting the rules of the game, but the one forced to play by them. He has completely lost control. So, what could be the response of the Russian bear, cornered and trapped conventionally? The answers the Kremlin can give to this strategic checkmate are not a show of strength, but a menu of deep helplessness. The first reaction, as always, is propaganda. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova appeared before the cameras and described the exercise as an aggressive NATO provocation and an attempt to drag Europe into war. The aim is to cover up their own failures by presenting this crushing strategic defeat to the domestic audience as a Western conspiracy. The second response is hybrid warfare. Since they cannot establish superiority at sea and in the air, they will then muddy the waters of war. More GPS signal jamming over the Baltic Sea, cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure in Sweden and Poland, and disinformation campaigns aimed at dividing society from within. Their goal is to create chaos within this alliance that they cannot defeat militarily. The final and most dangerous response is nuclear blackmail. With its conventional options evaporating, it is inevitable that Russia will resort to its last and most terrifying card. Threats like, "We will turn you into nuclear ash," hurled at the West through figures like Dmitry Medvedev, are actually a last, desperate cry aimed at breaking the political will of the Western alliance and forcing them to take a step back. However, the verdict is clear. Russia has been checkmated on the Baltic chessboard. It has been trapped by its own arrogance and aggression. The Russians' ability to respond directly with military force has collapsed under the rubble of the war in Ukraine. So a new Iron Curtain is descending in the north. But this time, NATO is weaving this curtain with its own will and its own power. And Russia is left on the wrong side of this curtain, alone and helpless. However, the Kremlin's nightmare is not limited to the icy waters of the Baltic and the iron fist of the Poland-Sweden alliance. While Putin's chessboard was collapsing in the north, in the southern flank of the empire, in the warm waters of the Black Sea, a much bloodier, much more humiliating, and completely different defeat was already unfolding. In the north, NATO's power created a checkmate situation even before the war began, while in the south, Ukraine's asymmetric and ingenious weapons, which did not even have a navy on paper, had already sent the wreckage of the Russian Black Sea fleet to the bottom of the sea. When these two fronts converged, the resulting picture was a complete strategic disaster for Putin's Russia. This is the story of the total collapse of Russian naval power and its double-sided naval encirclement in the Black Sea and the Baltic under two separate locks. History has rarely witnessed a country without a navy defeating a superpower with one of the world's largest fleets at sea. By achieving this incredible feat, Ukraine has rewritten the doctrines of 21st century naval warfare. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, with its historic base in Sevastopol, was a symbol of centuries of imperial power and fear. But this arrogant fleet was suddenly reduced to a paper tiger by two simple but revolutionary Ukrainian weapons, namely, kamikaze naval drones and domestically produced anti-ship missiles. The first act of this new war began with the emergence of explosive-laden, fast, low-profile, and nearly radar-evading unmanned naval vehicles like Magura and Sea Baby. These Sea Babies glided like ghosts through the waves of the Black Sea in the darkness of night, launching suicide attacks on the most vulnerable points of Russian warships thousands of times their size, namely below the waterline. While a Russian frigate's multi-million-dollar air defense systems were searching for F-16s in the sky, these small killers, costing only tens of thousands of dollars, pierced the ship's armor at its weakest point, inflicting irreparable damage. This asymmetric warfare pushed the Russian Navy into complete helplessness. Ships could no longer patrol the open sea or blockade the Ukrainian coast. The only place Russian ships were safe was in the sheltered harbors of Sevastopol. But this was precisely the second phase of Ukraine's plan. The naval drones trapped the Russian fleet in their ports, turning them into immobile, passive targets. At this point, the second weapon came into play. Long-range, precision-guided missiles, such as Neptune and Storm Shadow/SCALP, supplied from the west. Now the hunt would take place not at sea, but at home, in their own beds. The process that began with the sinking of the flagship Moskva turned into a systematic hunt. Landing ships, missile corvettes, submarines, and even command centers anchored in the port were destroyed one by missiles fired from hundreds of kilometers away by Ukraine. The result of this strategy is a complete defeat for Russia. The once proud Black Sea Fleet is no longer a fleet. Russia's most valuable surviving ships were forced to abandon their historic base in Sevastopol and flee to the much more distant and less protected port of Novorossiysk. It has now completely lost its capacity to project power in the Black Sea, pose an amphibious landing threat to Ukraine, or play a global role by opening up to the Mediterranean. The Russian fleet is now nothing more than a wounded and humiliated coastal defense force trying to protect its ports. This situation, now compounded by the power formed by Poland and Sweden in the Baltic Sea, means that neither Russia's navy nor its other military forces can form a meaningful alliance. The pressure, starting from Gotland, is squeezing Russia all the way to the Black Sea. In the coming period, Putin may not even have a single ship left that he can sail out to sea. Thank you for watching.